King Henry VIII is probably the best-known English ruler of all time, so much so that countless stories, TV programs, and movies have been inspired by him over the years. Henry VIII is most famous for being ridiculously overweight, having a fixation with beheadings, and for having no less than 6 wives during the course of his nearly 38-year reign. He was such a polarizing figure that he once got arrested and thrown into prison for attacking a police constable with his walking stick. When the police constable was informed that he had jailed the current King of England, he feared execution, but instead of sending him to the chopping block, King Henry VIII commended him for doing his duties and upholding his dedication to keeping society safe. But during the later years of Henry's reign, as he grew ever more paranoid and bad-tempered, the Tower of London became crowded with the terrified subjects who had been imprisoned at his orders. One of the most brutal executions was that of Margaret de la Pole, Countess of Salisbury. The 67-year-old countess was woken early on the morning of 27th May, 1541, and told to prepare for death. Although initially composed, when Margaret was told to place her head on the block, her self-control deserted her and she tried to escape. Her captors were forced to pin her onto the block, where the amateur executioner hacked at the poor woman's head and neck, eventually severing them after the 11th blow. However, it might surprise you to learn that there was a lot more to this Tudor king than meets the eye. King Henry did a lot more during his reign than order executions and gain weight. Today, I'm going to look at bizarre facts that I bet you were never told about this much-married monarch. Most of the portraits that we see today of King Henry usually show him as a massively overweight old man with a beard. However, back in the days of his youth, he was actually known for being an incredibly handsome young man. He wasn't only popular with the ladies because of his money and power. Henry was also hugely admired for his good looks. Clean-shaven for much of his life, Henry was very tall for the time. At 6 foot 3 inches, he stood well above the average Englishman in height. He had a full head of extremely striking red hair and also had an athletic build thanks to his love of jousting, hunting, and tennis. And he was especially famous for his muscular calves, the equivalent of having a six-pack today. All this changed in 1536 when the king, then in his mid-40s, suffered a serious wound to his leg while jousting. This never properly healed and instead turned into a permanent injury, which prevented Henry from exercising, so that he put on so much weight and turned into the enormous mountain of a man that we recognize from the pictures today. Henry should have never been king. Although he is arguably the most famous English monarch of all time, Henry VIII should never have ascended to the throne. There are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, his father, Henry VII, seized the throne from King Richard III after the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, and therefore wasn't the rightful king of England. In fact, Henry VII's claim to the throne was extremely weak. He was the great-great-grandson of King Edward III's 4th son with his 3rd wife. Should the line of succession have continued, Henry would never have gotten anywhere near the crown. Also, Henry VIII had an older brother named Arthur, who should have succeeded to the throne on his father's death. Unfortunately, Arthur died when he was just 15 years old, leaving Henry as the only male heir. England's most married monarch had a reputation for being quite the ladies' man, for obvious reasons. In addition to having 6 wives, he also kept several mistresses over the years, and even fathered at least 1 illegitimate child by them. But this doesn't mean that he was very adventurous in the bedroom. Quite the opposite, actually. Behind closed doors, he was known for being quite a prude. Although he had a great love for women, it appears that he preferred to stick to regular, vanilla, tried and tested lovemaking techniques. When Anne Boleyn finally gave in to his demands and became his mistress after he pursued her relentlessly, he was very shocked and surprised at the intimate knowledge she seemed to possess, and later on accused her of not being a virgin. In fact, her French bedroom practices were cited against her when she was brought to trial for witchcraft and adultery, and no doubt led to her being accused of sleeping with 100 men before being found guilty and executed by the sword. One thing many people know about King Henry is that he had great difficulty producing a male heir to his throne. Today it's believed that Henry's blood may have been to blame for the problem. There is a modern-day theory which suggests that Henry may have had a rare blood type which was positive for the Kell antigen group. A Kell antigen is a protein that triggers immune responses which his partners did not possess, making them bad reproductive matches. In a first pregnancy, a Kell-positive man and a Kell-negative woman can have a healthy Kell-positive baby together. In subsequent pregnancies, however, this isn't the case. This would have meant that if he got a woman pregnant again and the resulting baby was also Kell-positive, their mother would then develop Kell antibodies, which would attack future fetuses. Since Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn both experienced several miscarriages in later pregnancies, and Henry's first two sons were both the result of first pregnancies, this theory is a strong possibility. But that wasn't the only genetic disorder he had. King Henry may have also suffered from a disorder called MacLeod syndrome. Henry VIII was well known for his terrible temper and was prone to outbursts of rage, but for many years the reasons for this remained unknown. He was famous in his day for his unpredictable behavior, but things got worse as he became older, and the people closest to him often experienced his wrath firsthand. He beheaded more people during his reign than any other British monarch, and many of the people who met their grisly end at his hands were his closest friends and relatives. Not only did he condemn two of his wives to an untimely death, but he also signed death warrants for a number of his intimate advisors and companions, including Thomas Cromwell and Thomas More. Recent theories have suggested that Henry may have suffered from a condition called MacLeod syndrome, which causes cognitive impairments, as well as a number of other physical problems such as mobility issues, which Henry also experienced. MacLeod syndrome is a rare X-linked recessive genetic disorder that occurs exclusively in men. Men with this disorder often experience psychiatric symptoms that may present themselves as psychosis, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and bipolar disorder. There is no cure for MacLeod syndrome, not that Henry would have used it because the disorder hadn't been discovered until 1961, after a Harvard dental student was discovered to have abnormal red blood cells following routine blood donation. This sure does help to explain some of his erratic behaviors and emotional outbursts. Since MacLeod syndrome also has links to people who have Kell-positive blood, it looks increasingly likely that Henry may have been a sufferer of this rare condition. The erratic king turned beards into a symbol of wealth and status. Portraits of England's best-known monarch usually depict him wearing an impressive set of thick, luscious whiskers. However, it isn't widely known that Henry introduced a tax which was levied on men wearing beards, which turned facial hair into a status symbol overnight. There have been some seriously bizarre taxes over the years, but Henry's beard tax has to be one of the strangest. In 1535, the king demanded that taxes be paid by any man who chose to wear a beard. The exact motivation for this is unknown, but many historians speculate that this was to raise funds for the government. Others even suggest that it was an attempt to discourage the wearing of beards, which might have been seen as a symbol of rebellion at the time. In some cases, individuals who paid the tax were given tokens as a proof of payment, which was usually a copper coin. Taxes were charged progressively, meaning the amount charged varied depending on the social status of its wearer. And because wearing a beard was known to come with a price, it soon came to be that every man who wanted to be viewed as high status immediately decided to grow their facial hair. King Henry, however, was exempt from paying the taxes even though he sported a thick beard himself. So there you have it, lesser-known facts about England's not-so-happy monarch. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe because I've got more historical facts lined up in the future. Let me know in the comments what you think I should cover next, and I'll catch you in the next one.